Working on the redesign of The Guardian, which I ended up doing at Pentagram with David Hillman when I graduated, was a revelation in the magic of what you could do on a page between basically creating a palette of grey and a landscape of grey with words, and understanding that you created the space through more or less space between letter forms. And what we were doing was creating pages and pages of text that had an awful lot of information. It was like painting. It was a landscape of grey. It was an unbelievable experience. And when I went on to work for Tate on the wayfinding, suddenly I was confronted with a whole new challenge, which was how do you put one word on a wall? And that's much more difficult than I ever thought it would be. And it was this sort of complete contrast to 500 words together to one by itself in the built environment.
Wayfinding, it's not very well understood in the industry, and that's why it was interesting for people to have a specialist in their midst. The wayfinding being the idea that people move around in an environment in a particular way, and that can be modulated and controlled and influenced by design, by lighting, by space. It's a psychological approach, if you like, to environmental design, because you nudge people through an environment in a way which is soft. It's not just go this way or direct people with arrows. It's the understanding of graphics and aesthetics within the environment, which is not just pleasing because you look at it and it's nice, but because it actually works on a person's sensibilities and how they travel through an environment.
The journey that people like me or organisations like the ones that I work in go through, they think, oh, it doesn't really matter, it's all about signs and maps and they're never any good and you can never get it right. I think Holmes would really opened up my eyes and the eyes of many of my colleagues to its more subtle effects and the opportunities. So how colour could change your perception of the space you're in, how views or interventions or even just a particular typeface or positioning of something, that could be an object, that all of those things collectively can create a feeling of wayfinding and change your perception of a place and the built environment. And I think that was quite an eye-opener for me, and particularly at the Science Museum, how that can contribute to the museum experience.
Holmes' knowledge of how people use spaces, how they live in the space, what they want, how they want to feel in the space is hugely valuable. That taught me a lot in terms of their approach to that. If they hadn't worked in other areas where people behave differently, we wouldn't have got that unique approach to a retail space. The mailbox development is a very unique setting. The urban room is set for people to sit, relax and dwell and spend time, enjoy themselves, but away from the madding crowds, if you like. So they were very well placed to create the environment where people were then going to feel how we wanted them to feel.
It's hugely important that the practice like Holmes would understand the mechanics, if you like, of human movement. And I think also possibly the things that we don't expect to happen. And I think that comes from obviously a lot of work and experience working within the design, particularly within their field, because I think we've all recognised that human beings don't necessarily all do what you expect them to do. The chaos theory often applies, and therefore I think they can bring that level of understanding from some of their other work they've done. Clearly the movement of people in different ways, actually it brings a completely different layer to what you might see as the way people might operate within buildings. And we found that to be hugely comforting. It also was incredibly testing in terms of actually asking those awkward questions about, do you really think they're going to come through here and go down there? What happens if they went over here, and therefore would they get lost, or however that would work?
We started working in museums and galleries, which was a very good, I think, beginning point, and we now work in all sorts of different environments. And we've always felt that in a museum, particularly when we did the V&A, that we should enable you to explore. In a way, you're somewhat lost. In fact, you're what we now call comfortably lost. And actually, John Mader sums it up incredibly in his Laws of Simplicity. He says, there is an important trade-off between being completely lost in the unknown and completely found in the familiar. Too familiar can have the positive aspect of making complete sense, which can to some seem boring. Too unknown can have the negative connotations of danger, which to some can seem a thrill. Thus, there is a trade-off between found versus lost. And that totally sums up, I think, our philosophy of understanding when we can gently nudge people through a space to when we actually really want to clearly steer them. So when I'm working on a project, I've always got the concept of comfortably lost in my mind. And when I think about the work we did at the V&A, I do want you to feel comfortably lost, which to me is that you are enabled to explore. And you go home talking about a fabulous collection, you don't go home talking about the fact that you couldn't find the loo. Where when we work in a university, somewhere like Oxford Brookes, you've got the balance of people who visit there every day to people who come once, and how we actually umbrella all those user types to create a space which is visible, clear, direct, but quite straightforward.
For me, the idea of comfortably lost, it's an interesting analogy, and obviously in a retail setting you want people to be able to shop where they want, when they want, how they want, etc. But you also want people to just kick back, put their feet up and just lose themselves in a moment. And if we can create retail settings that achieves people to kick back and relax and spend more time, then we've all achieved our purpose.
Being comfortably lost means that I can walk into a space, a public space, a museum, and understand the language of the building. I can see where I need to go, but I also don't feel dictated to. I feel that I can wander and discover and explore and maybe have some surprising and emotional experiences, but then be able to sort of reorientate myself quite easily.
When we talk about comfortably lost to our clients, collaborators, it always seems to sort of draw a wry smile, because actually it makes total sense. And if you have that as a kind of benchmark of where we do want people to respond and feel that way to when we don't, actually it kind of roots our strategic approach in a very human way. When you work in the built environment and ultimately your responsibility is directing people around a space, we know very quickly whether we have succeeded or failed, and we like the exposure that that brings. It's all about the visibility, the invisibility and the subtlety of our design solution. Whenever I'm working on a project that's going into the built environment, there's an element for me where I have music in my mind and almost a score that we are creating, a melody for the space. And if you think about melody, you have constants, which is the sort of metronome, and I think about the heights we place things, the size of things, the materiality, the visibility creates a constant. And then there are moments where you want that sort of crash of cymbals or that quietness, and we might do that in a way that's painting a wall of colour or introducing an artwork or where information might be found. And actually what we're trying to do is create a melody that works in a built environment without any sound, but you're doing it with provision of information, with pace, with scale, with height, with visibility. And somehow we hope that all of that comes together so that you don't notice the signs, but you found your way around. That's the piece that Alex will always say, which is we would love people to know that we did a project because they enjoyed it and they found their way around. We would hate it if people only thought that we had a visible style.